Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the Alarm and Restraint-Free Environment Conference Call. Your host today is Nancy. Nancy, you may begin.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar presented by the Lake Superior Quality Innovation Network. Lake Superior QIN is comprised of three organizations: MPRO in Michigan, Metastar in Wisconsin, and Stratus Health in Minnesota to support the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services priorities for healthcare quality improvement in each organization's respective state. Because Metastar is jointly providing continuing education credit for this presentation, we need to inform you that no commercial support has been received for this learning activity. The speakers have reported no conflicts of interest, and there are no planner conflicts of interest. For CE credits or a certificate of attendance, you must attend the entire session and complete an online evaluation within 1 week of the session. We encourage everyone to complete the evaluation to provide feedback on the session. Now I would like to introduce you to today's speakers. First we have Lisa Anetrini, Director of Clinical Services at Ciena Healthcare. Lisa Anetrini has more than 20 years of clinical experience in long-term care. Ms. Anetrini honed her clinical skills as a Director of Nursing and exhibited valuable leadership qualities as Licensed Nursing Home Administrator, Regional Clinical Director, and currently as the Director of Clinical Services for Ciena Healthcare. Ms. Anetrini directs day-to-day clinical operations and monitors the quality of services rendered for Ciena Healthcare. She also is involved with the Healthcare Association of Michigan Legal Regulatory Committee. She is a member on the Survey Regulatory and Quality Committee with AHCA and a member of the Nurse Executive Council. Also joining us today is Trista Piccirilli, Assistant Director of Clinical Service at Ciena Healthcare. Trista is a licensed nursing home administrator who has served the majority of her 25 years of nursing in long-term care. Trista has worked for Ciena Healthcare as the Regional Clinical Coordinator for 2.5 years and as the Assistant Director of Clinical Services for the last 3 years. She is also a certified dementia practitioner. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Lisa.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining the webinar. As she said, we have no conflicts of interest to disclose at this time. I'm just going to go ahead and review the objectives. The first objective is we're going to identify the misconceptions of alarm use, the benefits of an alarm reduction elimination program, and then how to implement an alarm reduction program. So what is a personal alarm? Everybody knows that it's an alerting device that is designated to emit a loud signal when a person moves. But why did alarms come into use at first? Initially, it was for short-term use and to get to know people's patterns. We also know that there are several different types of alarms out there. There's tab alarms, there's sensors, there's infrareds, there's sensor formats, and I'm sure there's many more that are out there that I have not listed. When it comes to fall prevention, we know we cannot prevent all falls, but I think we all know that restraints and alarms can't either. So we say that residents fall because they're moving, but my question is, why are they moving? Between 50 and 70% of nursing home residents fall annually, and on an average 2.6 falls per resident per year. Fall prevention, as we know, is essential to reduce the number of falls in any facility. And identifying fall risk and fall-related injuries should be the goal of the facility. I'm going to go into some of the misconceptions of personal alarm use. First one is alarms prevent falls and injuries. Well, the reality is that alarms do not prevent falls from happening. They truly just alert the staff that a resident has either moved or has already fallen. And just as restraints in the past caused harm by keeping residents from moving, through personal alarms, there's actually been no evidence supporting alarm usefulness in preventing actual falls and injuries. So alarms, they say, are a proactive approach to fall prevention, where in reality, they're a reactive approach to fall prevention. Remember, they only indicate to a staff member that the resident has moved or already has fallen. And sometimes alarms actually distract the staff from other important duties. So we have to remember that we have to do an individualized plan to prevent falls based on the individual resident assessment. The alarms give a positive perception of security to families. Well, the reality is it gives a false perception of security. The families believe that alarms prevent falls. And a lot of times what happens is they end up in the facility, in the hospital actually, and then the hospital will put an alarm, and the first thing that happens when they come into one of our facilities is they're requesting an alarm because that's what they had in the hospital. So the key here is making sure that when you have a new admission, that you're educating the family members upon admission of what the consequences of alarms are, like decreased mobility, depression, isolation, behaviors, sleep deprivation. And this, as I said, needs to be started upon admission. Another misconception of personal alarm use is they give a positive sense of security for the staff and the environment. But the reality is it gives a false sense of security, and at the same time takes a lot of time for the staff in responding to alarms. And then many of the residents themselves don't like the alarms. They repeatedly try to take them off. Sometimes the devices malfunction. The cord either breaks or the cord is actually too small. The batteries die or the battery fails. The alarm fails to go off. Sometimes the staff are slow to respond. And if too many alarms are in use, the actual staff gets immune to the effectiveness of the sound of the alarm. So putting an alarm on, people think, or the staff sometimes think that I can put the personal alarm on the resident and then go about my normal duties. Think about what you do when you're at home and you put your clothes in a dryer. You put your clothes in a dryer and you turn on the dryer and think that you have time to go about and do your things, and when the alarm sounds on the dryer, you can just go back and get your clothes and take care of it. Sometimes that's the same thing that happens with an alarm. Put an alarm on a resident, think we can go about our duties, and then when the alarm goes back, we check on them, instead of making sure that we have regularly scheduled intervals of checking on residents. So to me, if a resident falls with an alarm on, then the alarm didn't work. So let's go through some of the negative impacts of an alarm use. There's sleep deprivation, behaviors, skin breakdown, immobility. It affects dignity and privacy, and incontinence. Sleep deprivation actually is one of the number one reasons for a negative impact. It disturbs our sleep cycle. It disturbs residents and the roommates, can cause more agitation. And think about what happens to you when you are sleep deprived for whatever reason. You become irritable. You may get snippy at your family or your staff members. You may want to take frequent naps. So sleep deprivation actually leads to mood, status, and cognitive changes. Sometimes frequent napping, increased agitation, and actually sleep deprivation can actually increase falls. So one of the things, if we can stop disturbing resident sleep, we can actually try to reduce the number of falls. Another negative impact of alarm use is behaviors. When you have a cognitively impaired resident, they get disturbed by the noise. They don't know what's happening. Sometimes the noise creates actually more confusion and fear. So think about a resident who hears an alarm going off and starts to duck down when he hears the alarm going off. He relates this to his days when he was as a war vet, and relates it actually to the missiles or the bullets going off in his experience. But the facility sees is that he's got this increased behaviors where he's ducking down and doesn't really know the reasons why he's doing it. So let's talk a little bit more about noise when it comes to the dementia resident. It can affect the quality of life. It actually worsens the effects of the sensory changes. Noise at night can result, as I said, in sleep disturbances, which can actually lead to more problems during the day. You also need to be aware of other devices that for noise, such as pagers, the alarms, the doorbells, the change of shifts, the telephones, and we need to try to minimize all these types of noises, which can be intrusive. Have you ever received, as a facility, a complaint at resident council about the noise? I'm also a licensed nursing home administrator, and there were many times when I acted as an administrator that we would get complaints during resident council about the noise. Not just the alarm noise, but, the change of shift, and it was usually the change of shift noise that tended to bother the residents. What about, have you ever been hospitalized in the past and have had a roommate who had an alarm on, and their alarm kept going off? And it's happened many times before. Besides the actual resident who didn't get any sleep, also the roommate does not get any sleep. So let me go through a true story here. There was an 86-year-old woman who had advanced stages of Alzheimer's, and she was found on the floor next to her nightstand. And she was asked what she was trying to do before she fell. She explained, even though it was very difficult to understand her, but she said she didn't want to step on the rug in front of her bed because it makes a loud noise, and then her roommate yells at her. She said she doesn't like when her roommate yells at her when I step on the rug. So she showed the staff how she got out of the bed by climbing to the head of the bed onto her nightstand to avoid stepping on the mat. Even at the advanced stages of Alzheimer's, this resident was able to identify that the noise that was happening when she stepped on the mat was angered her roommate. This is just a side, just kind of going over the decibels, and a normal range is between 45 and 60 decibels for normal conversation, and between 90 and 100 is where the personal alarms end up going off. So think about you're in a sleep or sleeping, and either the phone rings or a motorcycle starting, and how that startles you and wakes you up out of a sleep. So some more negative impacts of alarm use is skin breakdown and immobility. Alarms encourage residents not to move. One of the first things that usually happens is when the alarm goes off, the first thing that our staff is telling the resident is to sit down. And residents don't want the noise, so sometimes they don't even want to make those small shifts and wait to avoid the alarm sounding. Because as we know, sometimes those alarms, just by shifting your weight, can set off. Incontinence is another negative impact of alarm use. And alarms sound, and instead of asking what the resident needs, we're always telling them to sit down. So we should be, if you're utilizing an alarm, we should be asking what the resident needs. Do they need to use the restroom? Do they need to be positioned? Are they having pain? Dignity and privacy is another negative impact. And we've had this happen in several of our facilities. Residents connected to one or more alarms, and the residents themselves have called them tethered. They feel like they're being tethered. And they've complained that when it sounds, it puts them in the spotlight, and they don't want to be put in the spotlight. Or think about the resident, and I'm sure all of you have had it at least once in your career, that has had 2, 3, or 4 different types of alarms on at one time. So what's the first thing, as I said, that happens when the alarm goes off? We are telling the resident to sit down. This is the opposite to what the resident has learned over a lifetime. Think about when you were back in grade school, elementary school, and one of the first things that on the first day of school or within that first week everybody goes through is training on the fire alarm system. And when you're younger, the first thing you learn is when the alarm goes off, you are to get up and get out. But now we put alarms on residents, and when the alarm goes off, we're telling our residents to sit down, and this confuses them. Prior to removing alarms, you have to make sure we address the fall risk, and that's a 2-tiered approach. And to be effective at reducing alarms, we must address falls and the risk for falls. So let's talk about the proactive fall prevention. So that's where we speculate risk factors, we put actions in place on conjecture, and action based on predictions. And then there's the reactive, which is the post-fall action. Our investigator, what we do after the fall has occurred, how we investigate, how we collect the facts, and how we then study the cause of the fall. So for proactive, it's making sure that we do a fall risk assessment and admission, and then regularly scheduled after that. And then reactive, making sure that we do post-fall actions. What are we going to do to make sure that this resident doesn't fall the same way again? One of the key factors in reducing alarms is to make sure that we do a root cause analysis. Prior to starting this whole process, you need to make sure that your staff is educated on what is root cause analysis and how to do a thorough root cause analysis. Remember, this is a team approach. This is just not the nurse's responsibility or the CNA's responsibility. So asking the question, why did the alarm go off? And if somebody answers because the person was moving, the answer to that question is no. Root cause analysis. What does the resident need that actually set the alarm off? What was the resident doing just prior to setting the alarm off? So what is root cause analysis? Well, we all know it's a process to find out what happened, why it happened, and determine what can be done to prevent it from happening again, and being proactive and reactive. The root cause analysis transforms the old culture that reacts to problems to the new culture that solves the problem, so more of a proactive approach. We're aiming at performance improvement, and problems are best solved by eliminating and correcting the root cause of the problem. There's 4 situations, though, that can affect a successful root cause analysis: the blame game, human nature, tunnel vision, and the perfect storm. The blame game, I'm sure everybody out there has done it at least once in their lifetime, is this: whose fault is this? Just, when somebody has a fall and you're bringing it to your stand-up meeting, the first inclination is to, point the finger at, somebody who maybe didn't do their job the way they should have done it. And we need to start moving away from who did it to why it happened. Making sure that you ask why again and again and again with root cause analysis. Like I said, being in morning meeting, asking why somebody fell, the first answer is the aide didn't change the battery, or why the alarm didn't go off. The aide didn't change the battery. Why didn't the aide change the battery? Well, they were locked up. But why are they locked up? So just continuing to answer the questions of why instead of just pointing the finger at somebody. Then there's the human factor. People get busy. Humans make mistakes. They inadvertently do things they're not supposed to do. Humans do at-risk behaviors. And humans don't learn everything that they're taught. Think about your orientation at your facility when you have new employees, general orientation, or when you went through general orientation. Did you remember everything that was taught to you during that 8, 10, 12-hour orientation? And then there's tunnel vision. So seeing at the time the accident occurred, you can only see it happening one way. So sometimes reconstructing the event, sometimes we kind of are able to look outside the tunnel and see a different way of maybe an event actually happening. Make sure you're taking a step back so you can see it differently. And then there's the perfect storm. So everything that could possibly have gone wrong went wrong. So let me give an example of something like that. You have an alert and orientated resident who's independent with ambulation, who was up the night before because her family was in from out of town. She slept in 2 hours later than her norm, wakes up, and has urinary urgency. So she gets up without her zipper socks in a rush to get to the bathroom, dribbles, and then slips and falls in her urine. So everything that possibly could have went wrong, went wrong. And sometimes that does happen. So why do we do root cause after a fall? First things first, root cause a lot of times is done supervisually because of time constraints. To do a good root cause analysis, it is a little more time consuming than just pointing the finger at somebody. But staff tend to look at the easy cause as an easy answer instead of doing some more drill down to find the right cause. So I'm going to give you an example of a good root cause analysis, a short and sweet root cause analysis, and this happened to be on a resident, Harry, and Harry had a fall. So we're going to go through and talk about Harold. So why did Harold fall?
Well, because he tried to get up.
Why did he try to get up?
Because he's upset about not being able to walk anymore.
Why can't he walk anymore, though?
Well, he can't walk anymore because he's getting he's weaker and he's been getting stiffer.
Why is he getting stiff, though?
Well, because Harry has Parkinson's, and his Parkinson's meds might need to be reviewed.
Well, why is he weaker?
Well, he's had a 10% weight loss.
Why is he losing weight?
Well, Harry's only been eating about 50% of all of his meals recently.
So why is he eating less?
Well, he has a sore in his mouth, so he's not wearing his dentures. So without his dentures, he hasn't been able to eat as much as he normally does.
So in this scenario, if we were to bring it to a stand-up meeting, somebody might have just stopped at because he's not able to walk anymore, and the first thing we would have done is sent him back to therapy for a therapy screen and eval, instead of drilling down and asking more questions. So once you've reviewed the Parkinson's meds and getting down to the true root cause of the problem is the gentleman had some weight loss, and he had but the weight loss was due to a sore in the mouth that we hadn't addressed yet. So making sure that no matter what the incident is, that you continue to ask the questions and continue to ask why, not just assume it's because they're weak or whatever the reason. So there's three areas to investigate for root cause analysis. There's the internal causes, the external causes, and the systemic causes. So the external causes of falls actually occur, it's 30% of all nursing home falls. And the number one external cause is noise. Alarming, isn't it? So other reasons could be poor lighting, clutter, floor mats, improper footwear, could be the time of day, could be the fact that personal items or assistive devices are not within reach. For internal causes, actually the number one internal cause is sleep deprivation. And then other internal causes could be medications, cognitive abilities, poor balance, endurance and strength, orthostatic blood pressure, restlessness and agitation. And then we have our systemic causes, which could be assignments or inconsistent assignments. The time of day, so mealtime change of shift, the location of where the fall occurred, and staffing levels. And I don't mean to say that we don't have enough staff, because that's not what we found at all. It may just mean that we have to be creative. If we have a lot of falls when you're tracking and trending in your analysis between maybe the hours of 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., we need to look at doing some creative staffing. And I don't mean just nursing. It may be getting activities involved, social services. So it's getting the whole team involved at looking at what can we do to fix some of these systemic causes. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Trista.
So when we look at the root cause analysis for a resident that's already fallen, there's actually 3 steps that we look at. The first one, step 1, is finding out what happened. We need to gather the clues together. We need to do an observation of the fall site, an examination. We examine the resident, we interview the resident and the staff, and then we do assessments. The next step is to find out why it happened, what allowed this problem to happen, and that's where we're going to do our investigation, our assessing, and we're trying to determine the primary root cause or the reason that this resident fell. And then the third step is actually putting corrective actions into place. We're going to implement our interventions to try to prevent this resident from falling again. So step 1, our observation skills are critical. It's really, really easy to miss something that you're not looking for. And when we do this training for our facility staff, we actually include a YouTube video. It's called the awareness test, and because of the technical part of this, we didn't include it on this presentation. But if you Google awareness test on YouTube, it's a great test to see observation skills and to
bring home the point of missing something that you're not actually looking for. You need to gather the clues, which means you're looking and listening and smelling and touching and questioning staff, questioning the resident, interviewing staff and residents. You need to do the fall huddle as soon as possible. That's a really important aspect for root cause analysis after a fall. You need to note the placement that the resident is in, that the surrounding environment is in, what the conditions are around that resident, and protecting the area around the incident. The room and the equipment needs to be secured as soon as possible because it's just human nature. We go into a room and we see a resident that might have fallen and maybe they're laying on their left side with the walker outstretched in front of them, and they've tipped over their bedside table and the water cup is spilled and the pillow ended up on the floor. So, we make sure the resident's okay, but then other people that are responding are starting to pick the table up and they're putting the collar back on the bed and they're moving the pillow and they're wiping up the spilled water cup. And these are all clues. These are very important clues as to what the root cause of that fall was. So we need to make sure we're documenting, at least in our heads right away, what we're seeing and securing the environment. Root cause analysis, we need to know why. Why did they fall? And like Lisa had said earlier, keep asking why. Why did Harry fall? Why did Harry get weaker? Why did Harry lose weight? Ask why. And what were they doing before they fell? You can't just assume what you think the resident was trying to do because it's not always accurate. Even the most confused resident could tell you, sometimes and sometimes not, but we've found more often than not, can tell you what they were actually trying to do right before they fell. And if this resident has done, let's say the resident fell transferring from the wheelchair to the toilet, and they've done this 100 times before for 60 days and never had a fall, that's when you need to start asking, what was different this time? What was different this time versus the last 60 days that caused this resident to fall? And then we need to know, where did they fall? I can't tell you how many times as a director of nursing I've seen incident reports that say, resident fell in the bathroom, and then when you actually start to investigate it, well, the resident wasn't in the bathroom, the resident was in the threshold of the bathroom door, which tells me they didn't make it to the bathroom. So you need to find out those specifics. Where did they fall? Were they all the way in the bathroom? Were they not? When did they fall? What was going on around them? Were they trying to reach the restroom and maybe didn't make it? Were they reaching for something? It's a possibility the resident has Lewy body dementia. Maybe they were having visual hallucinations. This is where we need to gather all of our information and not just make assumptions. And then the next step is determining the root cause analysis. And we have a couple tools that we use. One of them is the 10 questions, and we'll go over that. I think it's the next slide. And these are 10 questions that we ask with every resident's fall. And we do the post-fall huddle, staff interviews. When we cannot find the root cause analysis based on the questions, the huddle, and the interviews, we may do a reenactment. And we have a 5-page post-fall evaluation report that our staff fill out. And at first it seems cumbersome. However, when it's filled out accurately, it really does help drive down the root cause of the fall, and the staff has become used to using it, so they know what to look for. We do weekly fall committee meetings, and what we do is any new at-risk resident is reviewed during the meeting, but we also review any resident that's had a fall, and the purpose of doing that is to make sure that the intervention, the root cause that we think we identified and the interventions that we put in place, we're reviewing that to make sure that those have been effective. So when we talk about some of the clues in the evidence, the internal evidence, we want to know what they were trying to do right before they fall. We have our practice in place where we ask all residents all the time, what were you doing just before you fell? What were you trying to do? It doesn't matter if the resident has dementia. It doesn't matter if the resident's alert and oriented and independent. All residents all the time are asked what they were trying to do. And then we also look at the place of the fall, and these are included on our post-fall evaluation. Did the resident fall at the bedside? If they fell directly at the bedside or from the transfer surface, is it an orthostatic blood pressure issue? Did they get up too quickly and experience some dizziness and that caused them to fall? If they're about 5 feet away from the transfer surface, well, then that orthostatic might not have been the issue. Maybe it's balance and gait. They, took a couple steps, got 4 or 5 feet away, and then they lost their balance. And then if, they've made it 15 feet, it could be a strength issue. It could be an endurance issue. We also require that they check the commode. If they fell in the bathroom, we need to know, is there anything in the toilet? What are the contents? Is there urine in there? Is there feces in there? Is there blood in there? Or is there nothing? Did the resident not actually make it to the toilet? Is there urine or feces on the floor of the bathroom? Did they not make it and have an accident? Or, it's also possible if there's urine on the floor of the bathroom, is it their urine? We don't know. It could be their roommate's urine. Those are all things that we need to be aware of as we're determining the root cause. These are the 10 questions we ask every resident when they fall all the time. And the first responder, and that's what we call the first person that comes upon a resident that has fallen for an unwitnessed fall, the first responder always asks the resident if they're okay. If they're not a nurse, they summon a nurse. They try to stay with the resident. If they can send somebody to get a nurse, they do. Otherwise, they'll get a nurse and return immediately to the resident. And then the very next question is, what were you trying to do? They need to know what that resident was trying to do. And again, it doesn't matter if the resident has dementia. We always ask every resident all the time, what were you trying to do? Then we need to ask or determine what was different this time. Maybe that resident is alert-oriented and they've transferred themselves 60 times. What was different this time? What made you fall? These are all questions that we'll pose to the resident as well. We're asking the position of the resident. And these are questions that we're asking during the fall huddles too. Did they fall near the bed, the toilet, or the chair? How far away were they from their transfer surface? What position were they in? What was the surrounding area like? Was there too much stimulation for this resident in the environment? Was it noisy and busy? Was there a lot of clutter around? Was there a lot of things going on? Maybe the Red Hat Society was in singing in the hallways and, it was just too much stimulation. We need to know all of these things. These are all clues and evidence that we're going to use to determine what the root cause of that fall was. What was the floor like? We always talk about grippy socks, but imagine putting on grippy socks and then going into a carpeted room. That may not be the best footwear for a carpeted room. Also, when we look at poorly fitting clothing, a resident that's in a hospital gown, maybe the hospital gown is too big and it keeps falling off their shoulder. It just might take that little shift in their balance to try to get that gown up over their shoulder, and then they lose their balance and fall. So all of those things need to be taken into account and looked at. Was there an assistive device they were using? And if there was not, were they supposed to be using one? And if they weren't, why? Was it not in reach? Was it not available? We need to ask those questions. Did the resident have their glasses on and their hearing aids on? And maybe they had their hearing aids in, but they couldn't hear. Well, why couldn't they hear? Was the hearing aid working? Were the batteries functional? Was it turned on? Why wasn't it working? And then who was in the area when the resident fell? When we talk about the fall huddle, we do this immediately after the resident is stabilized. It needs to be done as soon as possible so that speculation doesn't override the facts. People remember things more in the present time than in the past. If you're doing a fall huddle and you're doing it 8 hours later, the details aren't going to be there. You get everybody that was in the area into that fall huddle, and you're asking those 10 questions. You want to know who's had contact with that resident in the last couple hours. What were they doing? Were they any different? How did they behave? How did they appear? These are all questions for the fall huddle. And if you do your fall huddle and you still can't determine the root cause, we will do a reenactment or a show and tell. It's better to use the same person. So if the resident can participate in a reenactment, we try to do that. But you want to use the persons that were involved and recreate exactly what happened. You want to use the same people, the same time, the same equipment, the same place, the same time of day. If possible, we could put that resident back into that fall position and see what was going on. And then once we've completed that, we're going to move on to our implementing the intervention. Well, what are we going to do so that this doesn't happen again? And a really important question is, are the interventions, are the solutions matching the cause of the problem? I can't tell you how many times we see a resident that's transferring from the wheelchair to the toilet and has a fall, and the initial nursing intervention is a tab alarm in the wheelchair and in the bed, just in case. That's how we end up with multiple alarms on residents when they don't really need them. Without looking at, was the resident continent, incontinent, was there urgency, do we need to do bladder patterning, do we need to do bowel patterning, maybe a bowel bladder retraining program. So many times the alarms have been the go-to for so many years, and overkill. Like I said, they might fall from the wheelchair, and we'll put an alarm in the wheelchair, and we'll put one in the bed, because now they've fallen from the wheelchair, what's saying they're not going to fall from the bed? So we need to make sure we also document what's going to be implemented and who's responsible. Make sure it's cohesive with your facility. And then part of this implementation of the interventions is making sure that we're looking towards stronger interventions versus the weak interventions. This next slide shows the hierarchy of interventions, and this is actually available on the National Center for Patient Safety. If you Google it, it comes up hierarchy of actions, and it shows the weak, intermediate, and strong. And weak interventions are those that require staff to remember their training. And like Lisa said, I don't know about you, but I don't remember everything I learned during general orientation when I hired in 6 years ago, or my once-a-year refresher courses. So those are the weak interventions where, we're saying remind staff to put the call light within the resident's reach, or remind staff to offer to lay the resident down. Those are weak interventions. The intermediate ones are those ones that require the staff to remember to do the right thing, but maybe we provided a tool. Maybe we gave them a list of residents that need to lay down for a nap, or a list of residents that, you need to check the call lights on. Those are intermediate. What we look for are the stronger interventions, those that don't require the staff to remember to do the right thing, because we're all human, and we all forget, and we all get busy with other things. So those strong interventions might be like timed lights, the auto-lock brakes, the anti-rollback brakes, contrasting the environment, calming interventions, where we can pull out a box and do some calming interventions for residents that are agitated and restless. We have the weighted baby dolls and the fluffy purring kittens and weighted blankets, and like I said, the self-locking brakes and the anti-rollback devices. And we actually, when residents become restless and agitated, they're more likely to fall. And we have a facility that initiated the interest boxes on their memory care unit, and they took a plastic box. I want to say they bought it at the dollar store, and they put index cards in the box with each resident's name and their interests on it. They involved the residents, and they involved the family members to find out what their past interests were. And then they made sure that they had these items readily available for when the resident became agitated or restless. Maybe they were a sports fan and liked to look through sports magazines. That would be listed on the index card. And when they start to get restless and agitated and increasing the risk for falls, they would give them a sports magazine, or maybe take them to a sing-along, or whatever's listed on those index cards. It's a great reference. Some other examples of strong interventions are contrasting the environment. Now, these aren't the typical Kleenex boxes that we see in the facilities. We probably all use the same flat ones that come from Kleenex brand, but it's as simple as taking colored duct tape or blue painter's tape and putting a stripe on a Kleenex box so that the resident can see, a dark striped Kleenex box against the white environment, because most of the facilities, you have white or light tan walls and white or light tan tile, and it all just kind of blends in. The next one shows the colored toilet seats. Think about your resident that has macular degeneration, that has lost their center vision and only has the peripheral vision. We've had a lot of facilities actually put black toilet seats on the toilets, because when you have not even just the macular degeneration and the visual deficits, but demented residents or low visual acuity, you walk into your restroom and you have a white toilet, and you have white tile, and you usually have white or tan walls, and it just all kind of blends together. How are you sure you're sitting on the toilet? So we've had a lot of success with changing the toilet seats over to the black toilet seats. And then we all say the most important element to preventing falls is the call light system. But again, our call lights blend right in with our white or tan blankets and sheets, and maybe we have colored comforters, but when the resident's in bed, the comforter's usually pulled down. So we have located vendors that offer colored call light cords, or we put colored duct tape around the shaft of the call light so that the resident can identify that against the background. And then we've actually reduced our floor mats as well. We found that the floor mats are more of a fall hazard. They make the surfaces uneven. They're not usually as long as the bed, and they're not cushiony. A lot of them are landing mats. You're lucky if they're an inch or so high. They're a trip hazard, not only for the resident and the roommate, but also for visitors and for staff. And we've had some instances where dementia residents are more confused with it. They think it's a hole in the floor. So, like Lisa talked about the resident who didn't want to step on the alarming mat outside of her bed that was on the floor. We've had residents that actually thought it was a hole in the floor, and they'll try to do the same thing, crawl around that floor mat because they don't want to fall into the hole. So where do we start with reducing the alarms? Do you go cold turkey? That was one of our big questions, and we don't recommend it. We didn't have any facilities that went cold turkey. It's a process. It's not an event. It needs to start with the staff and the family education. And what we did was we would identify our hallway to begin with. The education started with the families. The families were very resistant at first. It's really difficult, again, like Lisa said, they come in from the hospital and mom had, 2 or 3 different alarms on in the hospital, and they want to know why we're not going to put an alarm on mom. While we have a family brochure that we hand out for new admissions, we give it to them on admission day. During the process of reducing and eliminating alarms for residents that already had them, we provided that educational brochure to the family members before removing the alarms, such as care conferences or when we identified the units that we were starting with. And then the staff education on the alarm reduction. Staff needs to buy into the alarm reduction or it won't be successful. Again, the family education can be challenging. We talk about root cause analysis of the previous falls with family if that's the reason that they have an alarm on. And we tell the family and we show them in the brochure what we're going to do for your loved one and what the fall risks are. It's a nice brochure, and we have it on, I believe, our next slide. It talks about why we're concerned about the falls, who's at the highest risk, and I'm not going to read over the slide, but it also asks them to participate. We want them to let us know if there's broken furniture or equipment or things like that. How can you help? And this is provided again on admission for new residents and during the alarm reduction process. And then we also have a resident brochure and pamphlet that we hand out as well. These go to the residents on admit and during the alarm reduction program. So, how do you actually implement the reduction? You have to identify a place to start with. You could consider starting on a specific unit or a specific shift or both, or determining on the resident status. If you're looking at the easiest situation to start with, you want a resident that has no fall history or maybe no recent fall history. And when I say no fall history, these are the residents that come in and maybe they're a fall risk. So in the past, what would we do? We would put an alarm on just so they don't have a fall. So if they don't have a fall history, they're a great one to start with. No recent fall history within the last 30 or so days. Those that have the best chance of an increased mobility. And then we need to determine the root cause of the falls and the movements. Let's say they haven't had a fall, but they have an alarm on and they're setting the alarm off. Well, what movements, what's causing those movements? What needs does the resident have that we're not meeting, that they're setting off that alarm? So when we look at the resident status, we're going to start rounding on residents that have fallen. No restraints or alarms are put on any new admissions in our facilities. No restraints or alarms are put on any residents that don't currently have one. And then if the resident hasn't fallen in the last 30 days, they're a target resident for the alarm reduction. If the alarm appears to scare the resident or confuse the resident, they're another resident that's a target resident for alarm reduction. And any resident that has had a fall that has an alarm on, that alarm didn't work, don't put the alarm back on. The alarm did not work if they fell. And then when we look at the units, shifts, and times, once we take the alarms off, excuse me, what we do is we identify those residents that are the easiest ones to start with on specific units. So let's say we have 10 residents on Unit A. We'll start with those 10 residents taking their alarms off on Unit A for day shift for a week and see how it goes. And then those 10 residents on Unit A, day shift and afternoon shift for the next week. And, you know, those 10 residents on Unit A, day shift, afternoon shift, and midnight shift. And then those residents, that unit is alarm-free, and we don't put any alarms on anybody else who's coming on to that unit. And that's just kind of a general overview of how we did it, but it was very successful. Some facilities didn't have to go the full week with, you know, one unit, one shift, and then 2 units, one shift. You know, it might be a process of a couple days. The staff needs to buy into it, of course, and once the staff buys into it and the family buys into it and the residents, it will become successful. Our statistics for falls, we actually started this alarm and restraint reduction, focusing on alarm reduction in March of 2013. We had Suzanne Gilderman come and speak to our entire company, and Lisa had seen her at a seminar, so she came and put on an 8-hour presentation for us, and that was in March of 2013. We gave our facilities until June of 2013 to fully implement the new alarm reduction and elimination program that we had put into place based on this. And we pleasantly saw a reduction in the alarms. We're nearly completely alarm-free throughout our corporation, a reduction in restraint, nearly restraint-free, and a surprise reduction in our antipsychotic use. So this one shows our restraint reduction, and I just went back to 2009 to show, you know, only 6 years ago we were at an 8.3% with restraint. We implemented this in 2013 in March, like I had said, and this data is through the second quarter of 2015, and as you can see, we were at 2.7% in 2013. We have basically reduced our restraint use in half since we put this program into place. And if you look at the number of facilities that we have 30 out of 36 Michigan facilities that are free of alarms completely. We have 4 facilities that have 1 resident with an alarm and actively trying to reduce those still. And then we have 2 facilities where there's 4 residents with alarms. So out of all of our skilled and long-term care beds, we have 6 residents in the entire company that actually are using an alarm at this point.
And mostly due to family requests.
Yes. I want to say probably all due to family requests. Again, family resistance is a challenge. Once you provide them with the education and the brochure, they will start to buy into it, and not allowing new residents coming in to utilize the alarms is key as well. So this shows our reduction in falls, and this data shows the first full year of the alarm reduction program for Ciena. And at this time, our alarms weren't nearly eliminated, but they were on the right track. So in June of 2014, we had 14 facilities that actually had a reduction in residents that had repeat falls, a significant reduction. We had 14 facilities that had that reduction, and of those 14 facilities, 12 had become alarm-free. So 12 out of 14, not using alarms, had reductions in residents that had repeat falls. And then we had 7 facilities that had no significant changes in repeat falls. And of those 7, 6 of those 7 were alarm-free. I think the most telling statistic here is 13 of our facilities had an increase in residents with repeat falls, but of those 13 that had increases, 7 of them were at the time still using alarms. I think this just shows that the alarm use, the reduction in the alarm use is not increasing our residents that are having repeat falls, especially for the post-fall root cause analysis. It really has made a difference reducing these alarms. And then we threw this in here because a nice reduction that kind of just went hand in hand with it was that our antipsychotic use actually went down to 10.33% in 2014. So preventing falls is the key. Alarm reduction, restraint reduction, they're all tied together, and it's the responsibility of all the staff to ensure the safety of our residents, not just the nursing staff. You have to have buy-in from all staff, all departments. And we use this term, scrap future falls by responding appropriately. It stands for stopping. No matter what your job, your first job is to stop. This is, you see a resident that needs something or you see a resident that's fallen, you stop. You call out to the nearest staff member to find a nurse. You don't leave the resident. Reassure them that nursing's on their way. And then, very, very crucial, ask the resident what they were doing just before they fell. You need to do this quickly before any of the commotion causes all the details to be forgotten. And pay attention. Pay attention to the scene around. Like I said, people come in and they start to tidy up the room, and the investigation can get skewed because, tables are put upright and pillows are put back on beds and water is cleaned up. And before you know it, everything that you need to help determine that root cause of the fall is no longer available.
And then here's our list of references and credits that we use for our presentation. And at this time, if we can open up the lines for any questions.
Hi, this is Annette calling from Michigan. I just have a question in regards to a resident that comes to the nursing home that has a history of falls, maybe falls that have resulted in some fractures. So they are deemed high risk. What would the facility put in place as far as appropriate interventions?
So I'm trying to see who is.
I would say that probably the most important information you need the most important information you need to gather is what the details of those previous falls were before they came into your facility. You may need, and we don't recommend this all the time, but you may need to put that resident on, a 15-minute check to see what their habits are before putting an alarm or putting any interventions into place. But it's really difficult to determine what the cause of a fall is if the fall didn't occur in your facility.
And also then looking at what risks they have, doing your fall risk assessment to determine what risk they have so that you have to individualize it. Not every resident is the same. So identifying the risk and trying to get as much information as you can on the resident who actually had that fall. It's really difficult upon admission, and sometimes it's by trial and error. But talking, especially if you have a patient who is maybe a dementia resident and can't answer those questions that you need, making sure that you have good communication with the family. The family is going to be the key to maybe help determining some of those answers for you.
And you may also want to contact the previous facility to try to get some else about it.
Yes, I know that information may be very difficult to capture upon admission. So you're saying increasing staff observations when you're saying 15 minutes or intervals. So we're saying that increasing staff observation initially to maybe to assess what the pattern or the habits of the resident are. Because a lot of times you may not get that information on where they fell at the other facility or even at home. So that would be key. So I'm just wondering, because the surveyors will want to know for someone that's assessed as high risk, that had a history of falls, possibly ending in fractures, what exactly will you do with them first coming upon? So increasing staff observation, that's what I'm hearing.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's nursing. It could be activities. That could be, dietary in the dining room. That could be so many different things. It's not necessarily just the nursing department.
Okay.
And patterns and trends and asking the resident what they need. If they're moving around and they're fidgeting and they're restless or agitated, asking them what they need instead of, like Lisa had said earlier, we tell them to sit down. You know, they're moving around, and we say, no, sit down. Whether or not they have an alarm, you're saying, sit down, sit down, sit down. You need to use the restroom.
And I think what cases, and we do this with all of our residents, is we assign them a staff member when they are admitted into the facility, so a key staff member. And usually, you know, it's management team, but, you know, making initial contact with the family and the resident. And then we do daily room observations. Everybody is divided up as we call them quality rounds, so that you have different staff members going into the rooms and checking on the residents very frequently. So, like she said, it's not just nursing, because everybody likes to point the finger at nursing. We all know that. But getting more staff members, you know, and making sure that all of your staff members, your housekeepers, your dietary staff that enters the room, are all educated to pay attention, to look at the surroundings when you're in the room. And all that little bit helps. It is difficult for new admissions, but...
Thank you. There's a question in the chat box about the sleep deprivation being the #1 internal cause of falls. Where was that information obtained? Was that in your facility, or was that a stat from outside?
That was from Apira, and that was one of our references. It was Sue Ann Gilderman. She allowed us to use some of her information.
Thank you.
Okay, just another question, because you mentioned that getting the staff to buy into this is very key. So my concern is when you get this gathering of staff together to determine the root cause analysis, what was instrumental in making certain that the information gathered is accurate, as opposed to maybe the staff seeing some of the deficits as a performance issue, let's say it's the lighting, if there was poor lighting, in order to be completely honest so that you can get that accurate information? What kind of things did you do to help your staff kind of change that thinking process?
Well, I think one of the first keys is making sure that when you do your education with the staff, that first and first we're not pointing the finger, and then if we did find some type of maybe a deficient practice or an error that was made, that, you know, we're not going back. This is a learning process, so we want to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So we're not going to go, and if the aide forgot to do something or the nurse forgot to do something, making sure that we're not going to go and, you know, nobody's going to get fired over this. The whole key is we want everybody to learn from their mistakes. Now, obviously, I mean, sometimes there was discipline involved, but it was a process. It wasn't like the next day everything was perfect and people, you know, were up front. I think once they realized that what the outcome was is to find out what actually occurred with the resident, people were a little more forthcoming in trying to help prevent fall. And I think also in involving the staff like we do and getting their honest input, it allowed us to empower them, to empower the CNAs and empower the housekeepers to have a voice. And they're very involved in it now. A lot of our staff are very, very comfortable sharing their opinion of, you know, this is what was going on, or this is what, you know, have you looked at this? They feel very empowered and they feel like their voice counts. We've seen that across the board.
So thank you for joining us today for the Alarm and Restraint-Free environment. This recording will be available on our Lake Superior QIN YouTube page within the next week. For CE credits or a certificate of attendance, you must complete an online evaluation within 1 week of this session. We encourage everyone to complete the evaluation to provide feedback on the session. The link is on the screen, and we will place it in the chat box right now for evaluation. The evaluation link is in the chat box. For those of you who are joining us today that are not a part of the National Nursing Home Quality Care Collaborative, Lake Superior QIN would like to partner with you to improve the quality of health care in your facility. For more information about how to join and the benefits of participation, please visit the link on the screen or contact the appropriate person for your state. Thank you again to our presenters and participants. Have a good afternoon. apologize.
Lisa,